June 24th, 2011, Friday. Maureen poked her head out of the kitchen and shouted, "Rose, would you mind opening the door? I've got a lot to do right now." The teen looked at her mom pointing at the front door and made a grimace. Reluctantly, she rose from the couch and removed her iPod headphones. On the other side of the door stood a tall man in a suit and a uniformed police officer. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit replied, "Hello, is Jason Woods here?" "Just a minute," Rose said, turning around. She covered her mouth with her hands and shouted, "Dad, the police are here!" Almost immediately, Jason came out of the kitchen wearing an apron and wiping his hands on a dish towel. "What did you say?" "Dad, the police." She grinned and pointed over her shoulder at the door. "God, you're in big trouble. Get out of here. Go help Mom in the kitchen. Now get out." He slapped the girl's butt as she skipped past. "Good evening. I'm Jason Woods. What can I do for you?" "I'm Detective Scanlon, and this is Officer Pellegrino," the man in the suit said, holding out his ID and badges. "Can we come in?" "Sure, come on in. I apologize for the chaos. My daughter's wedding is tomorrow, and someone forgot to tell the caterer about some South Sea kale dish or something, and we're doing our best to get everything in on time. Let me give you a little advice. Never have daughters, and if you do, never let them marry. It's too expensive, and they'll just drive everybody crazy in the end." "I heard that!" shouted an excited female voice from the other room. "Damn, now I'm in trouble. Okay, what can I do for you? I'm sorry to bother you at a time like this, but were you Alicia Wood's husband?" All the color was gone from Jason's face, and his hands sagged listlessly. The dish towel fell to the floor. He stood like that in the entryway, looking stunned at the two people standing there. "Honey, who was at the door?" A pretty middle-aged blonde woman wearing the same apron came out of the kitchen to Jason. "Hi, I'm Maureen," she said, extending her hand to the two officers. "Oh, hold that thought. Unless you want all your hands covered in papaya, wait a minute." Bending over, she picked up a towel from the floor and began drying her hands. It was then that she noticed the lack of color and the look on her husband's face. "Jason, what's going on? Are you Mrs. Woods?" the officer asked. "Yes, we have news about the first Mrs. Woods, Alicia." Now the color was gone from her face, and she turned to look at her husband. "Oh, God, no. Mr. Woods, Mrs. Woods, I don't know if this will be good news or not, but Alicia Woods has been found alive and residing in Washington State. We received a fax from the Seattle Police Department, and she is in custody in connection with the death of her husband. A fingerprint check determined that she was reported missing in 1987. Her name is now Christine Marks, but she can be identified. Alicia Woods is now Christine Marks." The detective took a breath and waited for a reaction to his news. The silence in the hallway was eerie. No one moved. No one was reacting. It was as if time had stopped and everything was frozen in place. Maureen continued to stare at her husband, tears glistening in his eyes, unable to decide whether to fall or not. Maureen broke the heavy silence. "Thank you, officer. I don't know what to say. It's going to take some time to, you know what I mean, a lot of things all at once." "I understand, ma'am. We only have one fax from Seattle, but I'm sure there will be others. We had to pull the case files out of storage to see what we were dealing with. After all, it's been 24 years. I was in elementary school when all of this happened. As soon as we know more, we'll get back to you if that's okay with you." "Sure, officer, call or stop by anytime," Maureen said. "We want to know what's going on as quickly as you do. Thanks for stopping by." As they left, the officers carefully closed the door and disappeared into the darkness. Jason hadn't moved since hearing Alicia's name. Maureen put her arms around her dazed husband and rested her head on his shoulder. When a drop of water fell on her head, she too began to cry. They stood like statues in the doorway for what seemed like hours, but was really only a couple minutes. "Simet!" A shout from the kitchen brought one of them back to reality. "Mom, something's boiling in here!" Maureen looked at Jason. "Honey, why don't you go lie down? Rose and I can finish up in the kitchen. I'll be there in a few minutes and we can talk, okay?" Without a word, Jason turned and walked up the stairs. As he rounded the corner, the bedroom door shut quietly. "Why now?" Maureen gasped. "Please, God, tell me, what did he do to deserve this? Tomorrow was supposed to be a happy day, and now it's ruined. God, please help my Jason." Maureen wiped the tears from her face with a dirty napkin and went back to rescuing her daughter from the boiling pot. An hour later, the hastily prepared food was finished and Maureen was able to go upstairs. Darkness greeted her when she opened the bedroom door. As light from the hallway filtered into the bedroom, she saw Jason sitting in an old chair by the window. He was still wearing his apron. His head was down. His hands were folded in his lap. Maureen crept over and knelt down in front of her seated husband. She tried to see his eyes, but they were hidden by shadows. She pushed herself to his feet, placed her hands on his arms, and listened to his breathing. He was breathing. That was a good thing. She waited a moment before she said anything. They stayed together in the dark for what seemed like hours. This time, it was an hour, not a few minutes. Maureen looked up and broke the somber silence. "Honey, look at me. Please look at me." Jason tilted his head and entered too and looked down at the beauty hugging his legs. "I know what you're going through, and I understand how much it hurts. God, how I understand your pain. I don't know what exactly you're thinking, but I can guarantee you one thing. I'm here for you, and I'll always be here. I will never leave you. We'll get through this together. You and I, together, the two of us." Maybe Maureen wanted to see what she saw, but in the semi-darkness of the room, it seemed to her that one side of his mouth curved upward. The smile, completely unnoticeable, became a ray of light in her heart. "Jason, listen to me. Tomorrow is going to be a very big day, an important day, and I don't want this to ruin it for anyone. We're going to have to put on a happy face and pretend the police never came until the wedding is over. You'll get through this. I know you will. You're strong. You can lean on me if you need to. I'm here for you. And then we'll deal with Alicia." Looking into her eyes, he drove the pain into a small nook in his mind with an effort of will. Right now, his daughter's wedding was the only thing that mattered. He would have to face the pain again later. He would need Maureen's help, but she had promised to be there for him, and he trusted her word. Jason spoke for the first time since he'd gone upstairs. "I love you." He removed one hand from under hers and gently ran the back of his fingers over her cheek. "Let's go to bed. We have to get up early, and it's going to be a very long day. I don't want our daughter to see nothing but smiles, not until she finds some other emergency that makes her panic at the last minute." 24 years ago, May 19th, 1987, Tuesday. Jason sat cross-legged on the floor with little Bethany on his lap, watching a Disney cartoon on the new VCR. Bethany was happy, as only a 3-year-old can be happy, watching Chip and Dale run wildly across the screen. Every now and then she tried to imitate their squeaky voices. Daddy loved watching every second of it. Bethany's older brother was sitting on the couch playing a new handheld electronic game called Space Invaders with Concentration. Jeremy was so engrossed in killing aliens that he wouldn't have heard the tornado sweeping through the living room, the TV, or the squeals of a 3-year-old. Jason was in heaven, and paradise was where his family was. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he had to pick up the kids from the babysitter, but he didn't mind. He loved spending any time with them and used Tuesdays and Thursdays as an excuse to get down on the floor and play. His wife's schedule had her working late 2 days a week, and Alicia didn't get home until 7 o'clock, so he was also in charge of dinner. Usually that meant sloppy joes or hamburger helper or hot dogs or whatever else he could handle. Today they had macaroni and cheese. Yummy. "You left me dinner," said Alicia, standing in the doorway and smiling at the three of them. Mommy squeaked little Bethany and held out her arms to be picked up. Alicia leaned over, kissed Jason on the top of his head, picked up her beautiful, squealing little girl, and hugged her tightly. Jeremy didn't look up from his game. Jason stood up and groaned, stretching his stiff legs. He tried to kiss his wife, but the wiggly little girl shuffled from foot to foot, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get any closer to her lips. "How was your day?" asked Jason. "Not much to talk about. Another dead guy, another inheritance to liquidate. How about you?" "Just got a lot better," he said, straddling the tall brunette from behind and kissing her neck. "Come on in and sit down. I saved dinner for you. Let me heat it up in the microwave." When the table was set and dinner was served, Alicia sat down to eat. "Wine and macaroni and cheese? How can you be a foodie? I just thought you might want to relax a little. You've been so stressed lately. Oh, and this wine is from the bottle, not the box. That's the good stuff. Wow, and it's only Tuesday. Are you trying to get me drunk so I can mess around with you? If so, bring the bottle over here and keep pouring. Okay, let me fill your glass. Jason watched in silence as Alicia ate, keeping his eyes on her. He couldn't get enough of her. The sight of her made his heart sink. Her touch sent shivers down his spine. Even the smell of her perfume made his knees weak. There was nothing about Alicia that didn't turn him into quivering jelly. To him, she was the most beautiful woman on earth. She was his whole world. He worshipped her so much that everything else in his life was unimportant compared to her. After Jason put the kids to bed, he had a quiet moment to sit and enjoy his wife. They both curled up on the couch, talking and sipping the last drops of the remaining wine. "Once the kids are settled, why don't we go upstairs and start cooking number 3, Jason whispered in her ear. "Jason, I think we need to give our full attention to the 2 we have now. We need to make sure they grow up strong and sturdy. Any more kids and I, meaning us, will go crazy. Let's just get into bed and enjoy each other. Make love to me, and don't worry about having more children, okay?" "Yeah, I know," Jason admitted. "It's just that when I'm lying on the floor playing with the little crumbs, I think about how much fun we're having. And if 2 kids is so much fun, imagine how much more fun it would be with 3 or 4 or 5. I just want you to get down on the floor with me too and chase them around the room. Then you'll see what I mean. I've never, ever done anything more enjoyable than this except maybe creating them in the first place." I'm tired, and I don't want to talk about it anymore," Alicia complained, snuggling against his shoulder and pulling him tightly against her. "I just want to hold you and make love like we're the last 2 people on Earth. Like tomorrow will never come. Like this is the last time forever. Just hold me and tell me you love me. I love you, Alicia Woods. May 20th, 1987, Wednesday." Jason's workday went by in the usual chaotic mess. One person was sick, another was out of town on some course, and one of the secretaries had a huge fight with her boyfriend and spontaneously burst into tears about every 30 minutes. This left Jason as the only person doing everyone's work for everyone else to the detriment of his own. The situation was so crazy that he worked 3 emergencies while simultaneously skipping lunch. When one of the office secretaries called him and told him he had a phone call, it was the first time he had to sit down and talk to someone for more than one sentence. "This is Jason. How can I help you?" "Hello, Mr. Woods. This is Tracy. I tried to contact Mrs. Woods to find out what time she was going to pick up Jeremy and Bethany today, but I couldn't reach her. Do you know what time she'll be here? I think the usual 3 o'clock. Why? It's 4 now and I have a 530 meeting across town. I need to pick them up soon. Let me call her and check in. If I need to, I'll come and get them. I'll call you back in a minute." Hanging up the phone, Jason called his wife's office. "M&P Estate Liquidations. This is Barbara Ross speaking. Hi, Barb. This is Jason. Is Alicia there?" "Hi, Jason. I don't know. I haven't seen her today. Hang on. Let me check with Harry." The phone was placed on the desk while Barbara talked to several people in the office. "Jason, I'm sorry she's not here. We don't know where she is. I thought she was at a client's house working on his papers, but Harry said he was there and she wasn't with him. No one's seen her today. I looked outside. Her car is in the parking lot, but she's not in the building. Is there anything I can do?" "Thanks, Barb, but no. It's her turn to pick up the kids and she's running late. I'll just go get them and take them home. If she comes back anytime soon, tell her I have the kids and have her call me." Jason was actually relieved that he had found some reason to get out of his crazy office. Taking the kids was the most appropriate excuse, but it wasn't like Alicia to forget to pick up the kids. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she was at the babysitter's at 3 o'clock sharp. Today, she wasn't there at all. After bringing the kids home and sitting them in front of the TV, Jason called Alicia's work again. They still hadn't seen her. He called her best friend Linda, and she hadn't spoken to Alicia in a couple weeks. He even called his mom, hoping she had talked to her today. She didn't know any more than anyone else. It took a few more calls to find a babysitter who could come right away. A girl from the next street over came to watch the kids, and Jason got in his car and drove to Alicia's work. He parked next to her car and looked inside. There was nothing unusual there. The usual trash on the passenger seat, a coat and a pair of gloves on the back seat. The doors were locked too. Jason went inside and talked to everyone, and everyone was as clueless as he was. He was starting to worry because this behavior of Alicia's was not usual. She always let him know where she was going and if she was running late. She was never late picking up the kids. After leaving Alicia's work, he drove around to all the stores and restaurants he knew she frequented. She wasn't in any of them. When he got home and paid the girl to watch the kids, he realized it was late and no one had eaten dinner yet. He sat the kids down in front of a hearty lunch of fish sticks and fries and made a few more calls. When he called his mother again, she insisted that she come over and help in any way she could. If nothing else, she could watch the kids. Now Jason was really worried. He hadn't seen his wife since he'd kissed her goodbye that morning. He thought about everything in the world and couldn't think of a single clue, a single hint that would help him figure out where she was. He couldn't remember doing or saying anything wrong that would upset her. There was nothing, no reason, no clue or anything. And worst of all, no Alicia. When Jason's mom arrived, the first thing she did was start giving orders. She cleaned up the kitchen before putting the kids to bed and reading them a story. She told Jason to call the police. When the kids were asleep, she came back downstairs and found Jason sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. "What did they say?" she asked in a quiet but concerned voice. "They said it didn't meet their criteria to accept the application. They said I should keep checking prisons and hospitals nearby to see if she's turned up." My God, they really didn't say that, did they? Yes, and a lot more. They said they're not actively searching for missing people. They wouldn't look for a person because someone said they were missing. And they had the nerve to tell me that she's an adult and can do whatever she wants, go wherever she wants, and with whomever she wants. She doesn't have to tell me anything. Hell, it was like they were telling me that unless she turned up dead, they wouldn't do anything. They didn't care. So what are you going to do? I called both hospitals, but she's not there. I called the police stations in all 4 neighboring counties, and they have no record of her either. I called her supervisor again and got her worried. No one knows anything. She is nowhere to be found. She disappeared like a flake in the wind. Jason, I understand you're upset, but please watch your language. I'm sorry, Mom, I just don't know what to do. Every few minutes I look up and wait for the door to open and Alicia to walk in. I jump up at every car that passes by or slamming door. I keep looking out the window, but there's nothing there. Mom, it's driving me crazy. I want to do something other than sit here and worry, but I don't know what. I can't tell you what to do because I don't know either. But I do know that when she gets home, I'm going to tell her off for putting you through all this, and don't tell me I can't. I'll say my word, and she'll have to live with it. May 21st, 1987, Thursday. Before the sun even rose, Jason was in the car driving to Alicia's work. He had been up all night, looked like hell, and felt just as bad. Before driving off, he still took the time to splash some water on his face to wash away the traces of tears. He parked next to Alicia's car again. With the spare key, he unlocked the front door and got in. He checked every place in the glove compartment, under the seats, behind the visors, in the ashtray, everywhere. He couldn't find a single clue that would tell him where it was. The trunk was no different, nothing unusual. No clues, nothing. There was nothing in the front but the engine under the hood. He sat back down and started the car. The radio came on with music from her favorite station. There was almost a full tank of gas. Everything was fine. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel and spewed a string of swear words that would make any sailor proud. Then he put his head down on the steering wheel. "Jason, I thought it was you." Alicia Barb's boss stood in front of the car with a concerned look on her face. She didn't come home last night. Jason only shook his head. He didn't want her to see his face. "Did you call the police? They said there was nothing they could do." Her concerned expression changed to anger. "I'll see to it." She strode purposefully into the office and disappeared. Jason just sat behind the wheel and stared into the void. About 10 minutes had passed when a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Barb exited the building, walked over to the car, and spoke to the officer. After a short conversation, Barb and the police officer walked over to where Jason was sitting. Barb walked over and put her hand on Jason's shoulder. "Jason, this is my nephew, Ted Parker. He's going to see what he can do to help. At least he's going to take a missing persons report, right, Teddy? I'll take it from here, Aunt Barb. You go back to the house and we'll come by when we're done." The young man was very different from the dispatcher who had called the night before. He looked interested, and he cared. He really wanted to help Jason. He asked a lot of questions, many of which seemed irrelevant to Jason, but he still answered to the best of his knowledge. The officer searched the car again and looked in places Jason never thought to look, like the crevices between the seat and the seatback and the first aid kit. He even took off the spare tire and looked under it. Like Jason, he found nothing. He advised that they take the car home, lock it up, and don't touch anything in it, just in case they needed to take another look at everything. When they were done in the parking lot, both men walked to the office. Barb showed them Alicia's office and what she was working on. It was a large open space with boxes of papers, documents, photos, and other little things related to the probate filing. Barb turned on the computer and helped the officer go through the documents. They found nothing obvious or useful. The young officer told Barb to lock the computer and, if possible, all the contents of her office. Once he turned in the missing persons report, other officers would be around to go over what he had already done in more detail. He did his best to delay Jason's fears, but it really didn't help much. Jason was almost shaking when the officer left. He had no more to do now than he had last night. Alicia was missing, and he was in no condition to do anything useful. He decided to drive home and come back for her car later. On the way home, he drove around several dozen roads. He drove all over the city looking for her. He even stopped by places he knew she would never go. He just drove without thinking and went wherever the car pointed. When he got home, there was a message on the answering machine. He quickly rewound the tape and listened, hoping it was Alicia. It was his secretary at work asking where he had been. Jason, in his hurry to find his wife, had forgotten to call work and tell them he was taking a day or two off. He called his boss and explained the situation. The boss told him to do what he had to do and take as much time as he needed. He had a great boss. Jason's mom took the kids to the park and he was home alone with his thoughts. He sat down at the kitchen table and drank a soda. His thoughts were racing in 1,000 directions at once. He had 1,000 questions. What if she's lying in a ditch, injured and can't call for help? What if she's wandering around town with amnesia? What if someone kidnapped her? What if this? What if something else? Dozens of what-if scenarios filled his mind, even the impossible ones. When he thought about what if she ran off with some other man, he immediately dismissed the thought. It was so far from what Alicia was like that it was beyond absurd. Thinking about it gave him a headache. He put the phone down on the table and drifted off to sleep. It was dark when Jason looked up from the table. The house was quiet. Usually there were the sounds of children playing or the TV playing, but now Jason heard only the eerie silence of the void. The only sign of life was the light in the living room. Jason walked into the room and saw his mother sitting in a chair next to a small lamp, reading a magazine. "Hi," Jason mumbled incoherently. "Hi, how are you feeling?" "My neck's stiff, everything hurts, but mostly I feel like, well, I know. Look, I dropped the kids off at your sister's. They can spend the night there or stay as long as they need to. I told everyone what's going on, and everyone is just as worried as you are. I even told Pastor Benningfield, and he said there will be a special prayer for you and Alicia on Sunday. Jason, honey, everyone loves you and wants to help you. If you say the word, there will be an army of people here in no time to do what they can. I've moved into the spare room, and I'll stay until this is over. Now go upstairs and take a shower. When you come downstairs, I'll make dinner." Jason turned to go upstairs, but stopped halfway up. He turned and walked over to his mother, wrapped his arms around her shoulders and pulled her close to him, just as he had when he fell off his bike as a child and skinned his knee. Jason was now in great need of a mother's love. May 25th, 1987, Monday. Alicia was gone. She was nowhere to be found. Jason spent Saturday and Sunday driving all over the neighborhood trying to find her. It was good that gasoline prices had come down since the catastrophic shortages of a few years ago, but still paying 95 cents a gallon was a lot. He talked to everyone she knew, as well as many strangers. Alicia had no close relatives, so there was no one to visit her. Her father died when she was a teenager, and her mother died a year after they were married. She had no brothers or sisters, and all of her cousins lived in different parts of the country. Jason called all the distant relatives whose name and phone number were on the Christmas card list, but no one ever saw or heard from her. Barb helped bring Alicia's car home and spent Saturday morning talking and trying to be as helpful as possible. Sunday afternoon, all of Jason's siblings and their families arrived to lend their support in any way they could. The day ended the same way most family reunions do. Everyone ate pizza in the backyard. It was a dismal dinner, but still people needed to eat. On Monday, instead of going to work like he usually did, Jason was sitting in the backyard looking at the fence when his mother snuck up behind him. "Jason, there's a detective here to see you. Mr. Woods, I'm Detective Ambrose. I have Officer Parker's report, and I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Okay, please have a seat. Would you like something to drink?" "No, thank you, sir. I won't take up too much of your time. Please understand that some of what I'm about to say or ask you may be personal or painful, but if we're going to see this through, we need all the information we can get." "I understand I'll tell you everything I can," Jason said in a rather dejected tone. "I won't repeat the basic information that's already in the report, but can you tell me the last time you saw your wife?" "Wednesday morning, I kissed her goodbye as I left for work. About 7:30, I think. She was supposed to go to work herself that day, but she never showed up." "How is your relationship with your wife? Have you had any fights, or is there anything bothering her?" "Nothing. Everything has been fine. We had dinner with the kids on Tuesday, as we do every night, and we sat and talked and watched TV until we went to bed. She wasn't worried about anything as far as I could tell. We hadn't had a fight in months. The best word I can use to describe the situation is normal. What's the status of your marital relationship with your wife? Is everything normal in the bedroom? I realize this is a deeply personal question, but we need to understand your relationship with Mrs. Woods. Everything was fine there, too. Tuesday night, we made love as usual. Thinking back on it, I can't say anything out of the ordinary about what is involved in our lives. Does Mrs. Woods have any close friends who can shed any light on her life before her disappearance or on her present whereabouts, especially male friends? I'll make you a list of all of our friends and anyone she worked with. As for close male friends, I don't think she had any. She worked with a few men, but I don't think she was close to any of them. Her closest friend at work is her boss, Barbara Ross, and her best friend from college is Linda Waters. I'll give you their names and phone numbers. And before you ask, no, I don't think she was seeing anyone else behind my back. That wouldn't be like her. She would never cheat on me. Have you checked your bank accounts, savings, and such? Do you know if any of her personal sentimental things are missing? Sometimes when a person disappears, they take as much money as they can with them, and all the things that were important and sentimental to them. No, it didn't occur to me to look at our checking and savings accounts. I'll go to the bank and get a statement of all recent transactions. We don't have a safe deposit box or anything like that. We don't have any stocks, bonds, or CDs that might be missing. I'll also get a statement of all our credit card transactions. We only have one. Mr. Woods, do you love your wife? Jason paused for a long moment, trying to figure out what he was asking. The question was too simple, so it must have been a trick question. Of course I love my wife. I'm just going crazy. I have no idea where she is, and I can't get anyone to pay attention to the fact that she's missing. I don't understand what's going on. Heck, she could be wandering the streets with amnesia, or some idiot could have kidnapped her. Of course I love my wife. I just want her to come home. I'm sorry, but I have to ask, have you always been faithful to your wife? Of course. What kind of question is that? I love my wife. I would never do anything to harm her or our children. That's just absurd. Again, I apologize. Can you tell me where you were on Wednesday when she disappeared? I was at work. There are 20 people who can confirm that. Go and check it out. And Tuesday night, you said the two of you were watching TV that night, talking and making love. Where were the children? They were in their rooms asleep. How old are your children? Jeremy is 5 and Bethany is 3. Yeah, no one else can confirm that you were both home that night. No, I don't think so. What's your point? Nothing. I'm just trying to figure out how everyone was getting around until you called and they found her car outside work. One last question, if I may. Can you think of a single reason why your wife drove off without a word to you and left the kids? I've thought and thought about it, and I can't think of a single one. She loves her children as much as I do and would be simply destroyed if she were away from them. That must mean she can't contact us. Some psycho is holding her down and she can't call for help. You have to find her before something happens to her. I'll die if anything happens. Please find her. Please. We'll do our best, Mr. Woods. Just let us do what we do best, and I'll let you know if we find anything. When you can, give me the names and phone numbers of anyone I can talk to who might have any information. And when you get your bank information, give me a copy of it. I think that's all for today. Thank you for your cooperation. I'll let you know as soon as we know anything. Have a good day, sir. Jason was so flustered he couldn't go back to looking at the fence. As soon as the detective left, he jumped in his car and drove to the bank to get financial information for the detective. After giving the paperwork to the police station, he drove around town again looking for Alicia. He did not return until the afternoon. July 4th, 1987, Saturday. 6 weeks ago, Alicia disappeared without a trace. There was a law in the Woods household. Jason walked through life like a zombie. His mother had to tell him when to eat and when to bathe, even remind him that he had a job and responsibilities at work. But his heart didn't lie to anything else. There was a huge hole gaping in the place of his heart. There was no information about Alicia. The police had found nothing good or bad to report. There were no unidentified bodies in this state or neighboring states, so that was good news. But there was absolutely nothing else. The police towed Alicia's car into the garage and thoroughly inspected it, and they found nothing. The police searched their home and found nothing suspicious either. No money missing from their accounts, no personal items missing. They interviewed friends, neighbors, co-workers, churchgoers, and business owners all over town. They showed her picture in hotels and restaurants, and still nothing. The result of hundreds of hours of phone calls and interviews was zero. Nada, nothing. The police had no more guesses as to what had happened to her than Jason did. She just vanished into thin air. Poof. Jason's siblings arrived on the 4th of July and brought their families with them, hoping loved ones would help. It didn't help. Early in the evening, someone not quite sane asked Jason if he had ever suspected Alicia of having a boyfriend. This pissed him off like fireworks on the 4th of July. He started yelling and screaming at everyone, and even took a swing at his older brother. The three men had to physically restrain him and take him into the house. He continued yelling and screaming at everyone until his mother squeezed through the crowd of bodies and stood face to face with him. He even yelled at her until she wrapped her arms around his chest and started hugging him. Jason stopped screaming and began sobbing uncontrollably on her shoulder. Everyone quietly withdrew, leaving the two of them alone with their tears. The worst part was that Jason had no idea if Alicia was alive or dead. He had none. If she was dead, he would have a body to grieve over. If he found out she had run off with another man, he might be able to come to terms with it someday. It would be unpleasant for him, but at least he would know something. And not knowing was far worse than knowing. Without knowing, it would be impossible to finish what he had started. September 8th, 1987, Tuesday. Alicia had been gone for almost 4 months. The police categorized her disappearance as a low priority, but sent the necessary missing person information to the FBI in Washington, D.C. They did everything they could, and there was nothing else to do. She was gone, and they had other, more pressing matters to worry about. Jason was still a walking zombie. He went to work and did what he had to do, but he was no longer the enthusiastic person he used to be. He went to the grocery store when there was nothing left to eat in the house. He played with the kids. When the lawn needed mowing, he mowed it. Sometimes he would drive around the neighborhood looking for Alicia, and when he returned, he felt emotionally drained. Everywhere he went, he would look at the people in the crowd and imagine seeing her among those faces. Whenever he saw her, it was only in his imagination. She wasn't. After work, Jason made an appointment with a counselor. Jason preferred to use the term counselor rather than psychologist. He didn't want to believe that he had lost his mind. He was just very sad. A counselor was a professional who worked with people who had lost loved ones, either through divorce, death, or, as in Jason's case, disappearance. For an entire hour, Jason poured his heart out to the man sitting across from him. Occasionally, Dr. Harper would ask questions to clarify something Jason said, but mostly he just listened and took notes. Several times Jason burst into tears, but the kind doctor only handed him a box of tissues. Jason left exhausted. The doctor sat afterward and went over his notes, knowing exactly what steps he needed to take to get Jason back to normal. They both had a long way to go. "How was your first session with Dr. Harper?" asked Jason's mother as soon as he sat down at the table to eat. "I don't know. All he did was listen to me mumble something the whole time. He barely said a word. I hope it's not like this every session, because soon I won't have anything to say. I realize he's the best person to be in that situation. Just be patient with him and remember that he's here to help you. You won't be able to do it on your own. Now be quiet and eat your dinner. Yes, ma'am. December 25th, 1987, Friday. Alicia had been gone for 7 months. It was Christmas Day, a day of goodwill and good cheer for everyone but Jason. The sessions with Dr. Harper had been helpful. Jason realized that Alicia's disappearance was just like the death of a loved one. The stages of grief were the same. The only difference was that with death, there was a body, something tangible to touch and grieve. In the case of disappearance, there were only memories. Dealing with that was much more difficult. Jason was in the process of overcoming his depression. Before coming to terms with what had happened, depression had to be defeated, or at least warded off. Jeremy and Bethany were downstairs unwrapping presents at 6 in the morning. Jason and his mother were stumbling down the stairs when they heard screaming and yelling downstairs. For the first time in months, Jason smiled as he watched the 2 toddlers dive into the sea of presents. For a moment, everything in the world centered on the 2 little children under the decorated pine tree, sitting amongst a pile of wrapping paper. For a moment, everything was as it should be. Then Alicia entered his thoughts and the smile disappeared. "Merry Christmas's son," Mom said, holding out a box wrapped in bright red paper. Jason took the box and smiled again. He reached under the couch cushion and pulled out his little box. "Thanks, Mom. Here's your present, Merry Christmas." Jason unwrapped the gift, a new camera. He'd never had a good camera. He had a small camera in a box that all he had to do was aim, shoot, and advance the film. It was a top-of-the-line Canon EOS Rebel 35 Maymom camera with all the goodies and whistles and lots of boxes of film. "I want you to take lots of pictures of my grandchildren. I want to spend my later years looking through the albums you created and seeing your kids grow up in those pictures. I want you to get out of the house and go somewhere with them, live again, play with them, do all the things you have to do to get back to life. Maybe you can even teach me how to use this thing, and I can take pictures of you with the kids." Jason looked at the treasure in his hands. He knew exactly what it was. It was a tool that would help him see his children and enjoy life again, and perhaps with such a tool he could move forward instead of standing still and wallowing in his misery. It was the best gift he'd ever received. "Open your present," Jason asked. She opened the small box and discovered a gold charm bracelet inside. Each link of the chain represented a different letter of the alphabet with the words, "Thank you for everything, love." From the chain with the letters dangled 7 key chains, 1 for each of her children. She looked at Jason and smiled from ear to ear. It wasn't until Bethany wiggled and tried to take the gold bracelet for herself that she wrapped it around her wrist and clutched it. It was her bracelet, and it meant everything to her. Her son was coming back from an unimaginable tragedy that had taken him away from everyone. "Thank you, Lord," she thought to herself. The kids were playing with their new toys, and Mom was making breakfast, so Jason snuck into the room and closed the door. He was sitting at his desk reading one of the newspapers from the stack on top when Mom knocked gently on the door and opened it. She looked at what he was doing and then at him. "I just want you to know that I'm not a snoop or a nerd, but I do clean around here sometimes. I know what that is. It's your will. I want to apologize, but I read it. I think what you're doing is a wonderful thing, looking out for Jeremy and Bethany's well-being after you're gone. It's the right thing to do. But I'm also taking out the trash, and I found a note in the trash that tells me that you're not just thinking about their well-being. You're thinking about your own death. You're planning something that I can't even imagine. Don't try to tell me I'm an old woman and I'm having crazy thoughts. I'm not. It is. If you think your children will be better off without you, you were the crazy one. They've already lost their mother. Don't make them go through the loss of their father, too. Think about the people you will leave behind, the pain and suffering you will cause them. Think about how Alicia felt when she left. We would have felt just as bad as you did. Think about us. Don't do what you're thinking. I'm begging you." Jason looked down sadly, listening to the wisest man he had ever known. He was ashamed that she was right. He was a fool for even thinking about what he was about to do. He would have to talk to Dr. Harper about it after the vacations. "Come on, breakfast is ready," Mom said solemnly. May 20th, 1988, Friday. "Jason, what are you doing here?" Barbara Ross walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. They were both standing in the parking lot outside the office where Alicia had worked a year ago. It had been exactly 1 year since she had disappeared. For Jason, that year had been filled with pain and horror. The worst part was telling 2 very young children that their mom was never coming home again. He had to tell them she wasn't in heaven when they childishly asked if she was dead. He couldn't tell them where she was. He just cried and hugged them. He cried a lot. "I have nowhere to go." Jason sobbed. "When someone dies, you can go to the cemetery, visit them on their birthday or anniversary. But when someone just picks up and disappears, there's nowhere to go. Alicia disappeared a year ago today. I decided to go where I knew she was last. Here in this parking lot, I don't know what else to do." Empty Jason stood with his head down in his hands and his pockets. He was openly crying. With one foot, he pushed off a small pebble in the pavement, not knowing what else to do. It had been a year and the pain was as real and intense as the first day. Barb walked over and put her arm around the sufferer. "Let's go inside. Let me get you a cup of coffee. Maybe Harry has something stronger we could put in it. We'll celebrate our friend's life together." Holding hands, they walked across the parking lot and into a small office building, leaving a trail of tears behind them. Chapter 2. Ghosts. The ghosts of the past that haunt us in the present also belong to the present moment. To observe them deeply, to realize their nature and transform them is to transform the past. Thich Nhat Hanh, June 25th, 2011, Saturday. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Jenny and Tom kissed for the first time as Mr. and Mrs. Littleton. Jenny's sisters Bethany and Rose smiled on one side and her brothers Jeremy and Robert on the other. Tom's 2 brothers and 2 sisters completed the 8 bridesmaids and groomsmen on the platform. Everything was going beautifully. So far, everything had gone off without a hitch. Maureen held tightly onto Jason's hand as the procession of brides passed by on their way out of the church. Jenny winked as she walked down the aisle, noticing the tears on her mother's face and her father's wide, proud smile. This was the happiest day of her life. She knew nothing of the anguish simmering inside her parents. The reception was lavish, the food was exquisite, and the orchestra was loud. Everyone was constantly complimenting the bride's parents for having such a beautiful daughter. Jason was the epitome of a proud and happy father, but Maureen was always 2 feet away from him and watching him closely. Everything went flawlessly. As the reception began to wind down and only the serious partygoers continued to dance and drink, Jason and Maureen made their way through the kitchen and found an empty picnic table under the trees where they could sit and relax for a while. Maureen sat down on the bench and rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "That was the most beautiful wedding I've ever seen," said the very proud mother, surveying the surroundings for prying ears and eyes. "And we were gorgeous, too. We smiled the whole time and no one suspected a thing. How are you?" "My face hurts. I think I've engaged smile muscles I've never used before. There's no way I'd let anything ruin this day for our little girl. If I had to glue a smile back in place, I would do it. 4, 1 to go." "Huh? What does that mean?" 4 children married off, and only our little Rose is still at home. When she leaves, we can go on that second honeymoon we've always talked about. Sunny Italy, gondolas, cathedrals, pasta, wine, and all the things we see in the tourist brochures. Just you and me in a little country villa, drinking wine and making love all day long. Sounds wonderful. A light breeze blew through the trees, and the 2 wedding refugees sat quietly, pressed against each other. There was a calmness in their eyes like before a storm. Everything was quiet and peaceful in this moment, but they knew that soon there would be a storm of disagreement and emotion. But that would be tomorrow. Today was all about love, beginnings, and celebration. Tomorrow would come very soon. "Jason, have you ever thought about us getting married?" "Every now and then, when I need to cheer up, it was one of the happiest days of my life. Marrying you made me a whole person. I was happy again. Why do you ask? Have you ever had any doubts?" "Never. From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one for me. You took some convincing, but I knew right away. Thank God for friends like Cliff and Willow. If they hadn't taken pity on us, we probably wouldn't be here now. Yeah, they're good friends. I wasn't sure about their invitation that weekend. I thought I was just a poor old widow with 2 kids that they took pity on and invited to a barbecue. I almost didn't go. It wasn't until much later that I found out they asked me to come so I could meet you. Willow told me that they thought you and I would get along and maybe help heal each other's pain. How right they were. And Cliff told me that their beautiful friend, who I have a lot in common with and who I got to meet, would be attending the event. I thought you'd be as mentally ill as I was, but what he meant was that we both had 2 kids each and had lost our first loves. When I saw you dripping barbecue sauce on your chest, I fell in love. And Maureen looked into his eyes and repeated the words she'd said 1,000 times before, I love you too. Silence echoed her words. June 27th, 2011, Monday. Hello? Hello, Mrs. Woods. This is Officer Pellegrino with the county police. I'm calling to let you and your husband know that we have additional information about Alicia Woods. If it's possible, we'd like you to come down to the station so we can tell you what we know. We'll be here until 6 o'clock. How about 5? I'll call my husband and see if he agrees. But I think we should be there at 5. If we don't call back, then wait for us there. Sounds good to me. Oh, and just so you know, the Seattle Police Department is anxious to talk to Mr. Woods, too. I'll see you at 5. Jason and Maureen walked hand in hand into the South Side precinct at 5 o'clock sharp. Detective Scanlon met them at the entrance and led them to a conference room on the 2nd floor. Officer Pellegrino was already sitting at his desk looking over some paperwork. Detective Scanlon began the conversation. I'm glad you could make it. Mr. Woods, we have some more information about your ex-wife. I know this can be painful, and if you need to take a break, just let us know and we'll stop. Before we begin, would you like something to drink? Maybe a soda or water? I wouldn't recommend coffee. A soda would be nice, Maureen said for both of them. Diet soda if you have it. When everyone had gotten their drinks, Officer Pellegrino began the briefing. Mr. and Mrs. Woods, here's what we know. The Seattle Police Department sent us a large dossier on Christina Marks, or Alicia Woods as you knew her. As we said, authorities have her in custody in connection with the death of her husband. Mrs. Marks was married to Thomas J. Marks. He was a long-haul truck driver, and they lived in a Seattle suburb called Cottage Lake. Mr. Marks died last week when an acetylene cylinder exploded while he was welding on his truck. Police suspect someone tampered with the valve. They are awaiting results from the coroner's office and crime lab. But in the meantime, they have detained Mrs. Marks. During the investigation, her fingerprints were checked against the FBI database. Turns out they belong to a man from Baltimore who disappeared in 1987, your ex-wife. At that point, they realized they hadn't stumbled upon what it seemed. Upon further verification, they found out that she had been married twice before in California and Arizona. Each of her previous husbands had also died under mysterious circumstances. Based on everything that they were able to find out, she was declared a fugitive and placed in custody. No formal charges have been filed yet, but since she is a suspect in the murder investigation, she is being held until the results necessary to charge or release her. Mrs. Marks works for a travel agency near where they live. A check of her finances revealed that she is a fairly wealthy woman. Seattle police are currently piecing together her movements from the time she went missing in Baltimore to the time she showed up in Washington. They have agreed to forward us everything they find as soon as they finalize the paperwork. With all the information on people these days, it shouldn't be hard to track her movements. At this point, Detective Scanlon interrupted and said, How are we doing, guys? Maybe you need to take a break for a few minutes. Maureen held Jason's hand during the entire conversation. Even though she could feel the tight grip, his circulation wasn't impaired, and she figured he was fine and could continue. I think I'm fine for now, Maureen replied. Good, let's continue, Officer Pellegrino said. It looks like she got most of the money from her 2 ex-husbands. She sold their businesses after they died. She has no children except the 2 she left you. They couldn't find any blood relatives, so we faxed them the list of friends and relatives you gave us back in 1987. Mrs. Marks was never reported to the police in any of the jurisdictions where she lived. She appears to have been a model citizen for the past 24 years. She has traveled extensively and has numerous visa attachments in her passport. Looks like she's been traveling the world. Well, Nothing else except that they sent a sketch of her if you'd like to see it. No thanks, Jason said firmly, raising his hand. Okay, then that's all we have for now. Except that the Seattle police are very eager to talk to you. They have your phone number and may call you soon. This morning, we sent their office all the records we have on the original missing persons case, and hopefully that will help them in their investigation of her movements. Do you have any questions? Maureen looked at Jason, who shook his head. No. Thanks for everything, Maureen said to the uniformed officer. Feel free to call us anytime. When they exited the building, the warm summer air was like a slap in the face compared to the air conditioning in the office. It was a refreshing slap that calmed Jason down, and he was able to loosen his grip on his wife's hand. They reached the parking lot and got into the car. It wasn't that bad. Was it, honey? Asked Maureen. Oh, I didn't. No, it wasn't that bad, he said, finally managing to spit out the words. I don't know what I expected, but I was afraid of what they were going to tell us, but it didn't turn out to be so bad. Thank you for supporting me. The drive home passed in silence June 30th, 2011, Thursday. Jason came in the back door and set his briefcase on the table. Maureen startled when she heard a knock and ran into the kitchen. Oh my God, you scared me. I didn't know what it was. She kissed him gently on the lips, making that smacking sound that suggests it wasn't a real kiss, just a formal lip greeting. Did you talk to them? She asked, pressing herself against him with her whole body. Yes. And what did they say? They asked me a bunch of questions that were already in the report, and then they said they wanted me to fly out there and meet with her. And what did you tell them? I said I needed to think about it. I don't want to, but I might have to. Well, if you do, I'll be by your side every step of the way. July 6th, 2011, Wednesday. Jason and Maureen stood at the door of the Decatur Street precinct, afraid to go inside because they both knew what was in there. Jason's past, and a lot of pain. A young woman in a police cadet uniform opened the door and asked, Mr. and Mrs. Woods, welcome to Seattle. If you will follow me, I will escort you to the conference room. Jason and Maureen, struggling to stay on their feet, followed the young woman down the hall. Wait here, please. I'll let them know you're here. She disappeared behind a door. Outside, conversations could be heard. First, a deep male voice, then a higher-pitched female voice. The tone was argumentative and growing louder by the second. The door opened, and Jason saw Alicia for the first time in 24 years. She was standing in front of the desk with her hands on the black surface, yelling at the uniformed officer sitting on the other side. She looked older and a little heavier, but exactly as he remembered her. I said I've changed my mind. I don't want to see him. Not now. Not ever again. Don't you understand English? Jason was standing in the hallway looking at the sight on the other side of the doorway when she turned and looked directly at him. Time stopped and silence filled the room once again. For a long time, nothing happened. No one moved. No one breathed. They just looked at each other and remembered. Slowly but surely, Alicia sat up and said, Please close the door. The door closed, robbing Jason of his salvation. No, no! Screamed Jason at the closed door. You can't do this to me again. You can't just disappear like that. It's not fair. He threw his whole body against the door and started pounding on it with his fists, trying to kick it open. Maureen put her arms around the hysterical man and tried to get him to look at her, to see her, to come back to her. But he was so insistent on talking to Alicia that he couldn't hear or see anything else. Suddenly, 2 uniformed police officers ran out from around the corner and grabbed Jason. They knocked him to the ground as he screamed, You can't do this to me again! You can't do this to me! After a couple minutes, Jason relaxed enough that they dragged him off to another conference room. Maureen followed them, sobbing deeply as she watched the man she loved dissolve before her eyes. It was an hour before things returned to normal. Apologies were heard everywhere. 2 uniformed officers apologized for thinking some deranged criminal was going crazy in the hallway. Jason apologized for losing his temper and lashing out at one of the officers. Jason especially apologized to Maureen, whom he had completely ignored when she had tried to help him. I'm really, really sorry. I lost it. I lost everything. I hurt you. And I'm sorry. Please, please forgive me. I love you and I don't want to do anything like that again. Even though she was in a lot of pain, there was still love in her eyes, and she asked, Can we go home? Chapter 3. Rebirth. Every night when I go to bed, I die, and the next morning when I wake up, I am reborn. Mahatma Gandhi, September 24th, 2011, Saturday. Maureen opened the front door and saw her worst nightmare standing on the other side. "Hello, I'd like to see Jason, please." Alicia said this without the slightest emotion in her voice. Maureen tensed, holding onto the doorknob and unable to think of what to say. The cause of so much suffering and pain stood only 3 feet away from her, separated only by a flimsy door. The one and only time she'd seen Alicia under Jason's arm before he'd gone on a rampage at the Seattle police station. Everything she dreamed of doing to this woman flashed through her mind. "He's not here," Maureen finally said, Isley. "He left with his daughter to go shopping. Why are you here? What do you want?" "I'd like to talk to him. I didn't expect what happened in Seattle, and I think we need to talk to straighten things out. Well, he won't be back for a while. Why don't you leave your number, and I'll tell him you were here, and if he wants to, he can call you." I'm traveling right now, and I don't have a number where I'm staying yet. Can I come in and wait? I won't bother you. I'll just sit quietly until he gets home. You don't have to do anything. I don't know if I should. Please, you won't even know I'm here." Maureen tried to imagine all the scenarios in which letting her into the house would be the wrong thing to do, but in the end, she couldn't believe any of them would actually happen. And if Jason missed the opportunity to talk to her and get the answers he'd needed for so long, she couldn't face it. But letting them talk would be even worse. It could open the door to other problems. Weighing the pros and cons, she simply said, "Come in." Maureen led her into the living room, and Alicia followed her as if she didn't know the way. Of course she knew, because she had lived here 24 years ago with Jason and the 2 children. "You can wait here. I have something in the oven." Alicia looked around the room, taking off her jacket. Nothing in the room was familiar to her. The last time she'd seen it, the walls were an ugly green color, and the carpet was beige and stained with the usual souvenirs that kids left behind when they played. The only thing she recognized was an object on the bookcase behind the couch. It was an antique microscope she and Jason had found at a flea market shortly after their wedding. It brought back memories of the 2 of them going to antique stores, flea markets, and yard sales on weekends looking for just the right treasures to fill the house with. All of that stopped when the kids were born. She looked around the bookcase and saw an old 35mm camera in a glass case lying next to a stack of photo albums, each with a year printed on the spine, starting with 1990 and ending with 2008. On top of the glass case lay a modern Canon digital camera. Alicia walked over to the fireplace and looked at the large family portrait hanging above the mantel. It was a typical studio portrait with everyone dressed in white and sitting barefoot in an idyllic pasture, smiling and pretending they were having a casual picnic. It was a beautiful picture of 6 people she didn't know and Jason. He looked happy, and the way his hand touched his wife's hand spoke of their connection. Alicia remembered that connection with him. She had experienced that feeling many times since then with other men, but nothing could compare to that first time. The first time had been different, more intense, and one that she would always remember. "That's Jeremy and Bethany on the left," Maureen said from the doorway. "On the right is Robert and Jenny. They're from my first marriage, and the little girl in the middle is Rose. She's our daughter and much taller now. I'm not supposed to know this, but she and her father are out shopping right now looking for a present for my birthday." Maureen entered the room with 2 cups of hot tea. One she held out to Alicia. "Go ahead. I promise there's no poison in it. As much as I'd like it to be, I won't do anything to hurt Jason." Alicia took the cup and looked at the portrait again. With sadness in her voice, she said, "They're all grown up now. Jeremy looks like his father and Bethany has my eyes. I didn't know how I would feel if I saw them again. I wasn't sure, but I do. I feel I can't explain how I feel. But Jason seems to have raised them well, and you, of course. Are they good people? They're great kids. They're both married now. Jeremy and his wife are in the Marines, and Bethany is a school teacher, has a daughter of her own, and another on the way." Both women stood in silence, sipping their drinks. Each was eyeing the other, sizing up her rival. The room was still chilly, but it was no longer the Arctic cold of the front door. Maureen saw a tall woman in her 50s with long brown hair gathered into a ponytail that ended in the middle of her back. She was wearing jeans and a heavy, multicolored ski sweater and looked like she was headed to the ski lodge. Expensive cowboy boots completed the stylish outfit. The silver belt buckle and bracelet on her arm were Southwestern style, as if a tourist had bought them in a Native American souvenir shop, but in a fancy souvenir shop. She used almost no makeup, but still had attractive facial features and bright blue eyes. Alicia looked at Maureen and saw everything she'd never wanted to be, a housewife in her 40s wearing unremarkable pants and a university sweatshirt with an apron around her waist. She had beautiful blonde hair cut to match her complexion and striking violet eyes. The tennis shoes she wore had seen better days. She wore no makeup, but she didn't seem to need it. Her face glowed with a blush, and her skin was the smoothest and creamiest imaginable. "How long have you been married?" Alicia asked. 15 years? And you have one daughter?" "Yes, Rose. She is our pride and joy. I thought Jason always wanted to have a big family. I remember him saying he wanted a dozen kids. Come on, let's go sit down. If we're going to talk, we should at least be comfortable." The two women settled on opposite sides of the coffee table, Alicia on the chaise lounge and Maureen on the couch. Maureen continued, "He did. When we got married, I already had 2 children that Jason had adopted. When Rose was born, he said we should have another, but we discussed it and decided 5 would be enough. There was no more discussion after that. He was never serious about having a dozen children." Both women paused to sip from their glasses and catch their breath. They were still tense, but breathing every now and then helped them relax a little. 18. Alicia raised her head over her cup and asked, "Do you know everything about me?" Maureen considered the many ways she could tell her how much she knew, but decided to be honest and go the direct route. "I know everything about you. Jason told me everything. Then you know I didn't want kids. No, I didn't know that. And if I didn't know it, then Jason didn't know it either. If you didn't want kids, then why did you get married? You had 2 kids? Why did you have them?" Alicia lowered her gaze to the glass in her hands and said, "I love Jason. We had a lot of fun together. I thought we could do all the things I'd always dreamed of, traveling, visiting exotic places, climbing mountains, riding motorcycles, going to Paris and climbing the Eiffel Tower, seeing the pyramids, all the things I'd read about and dreamed about since I was a little girl. But when I found out I was pregnant with Jeremy, Jason started making all his plans for the house, the school, the decorating, all the mundane details. I realized that we would never be able to do all the things I had dreamed of. We would have kids, jobs, mortgages, responsibilities, and we would never see Paris or the pyramids. Shortly after Jeremy was born, I got pregnant again with Bethany. It made Jason the happiest man in the world. But all I could think about was being stuck at home and being turned into a baby factory. All I could think about was a house with 12 kids running around in it. I was miserable. Did you tell Jason about it? We talked about it, but Jason was so happy all the time, playing with the kids and showing them off to the neighbors, that I didn't want to disappoint him by telling him I didn't want to anymore. I knew it would hurt him if I said that. So I don't think I really said exactly that, I just kind of hinted at it. He never knew you didn't want to have any more children. Don't you think he would have wanted to know that? I said I couldn't tell him. I just couldn't make him unhappy. So you just left him? Leaving him wouldn't have made him unhappy? No. Yes. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't want to hurt him. I had dreams that were shattered with having children. I wanted to do all the things I'd always dreamed of doing and do them while I was still young enough to enjoy them. I knew he couldn't do anything while we had children, so I decided it would be best if we broke up. And you told him that? No, not really. He saw how unhappy I was. He must have known what was in store for him. Good heavens. Did you think he could read your mind? Did you think he knew? How could you have been so stupid? He didn't know anything. He loved you. He loved the children. He didn't foresee anything. Alicia stared steadfastly into her teacup, while Maureen, leaning over the coffee table, chastised the woman for her stupidity. Suddenly, Maureen realized how close she was to strangling this idiot. She took a long, deep breath and leaned back on the back of the couch, staring into her cup. It took quite some time before the tension dissipated enough to speak again. Maureen asked, "Please tell me how you managed to accomplish the impossible, to dissolve into thin air." That's one thing that baffled everyone, even the police. Alicia smiled, as if proud of what she had done. It was actually very simple. I worked for a company that helped people liquidate the estates of family members who had died and left behind a lot of stuff. Most people didn't want to bother going through the furniture, personal items, and papers that people tend to accumulate over their lifetime, so we did everything for them. In a pile of papers from one of the estates I was working on, I found the birth certificate of a woman who was only a few years younger than me. I asked a family member about her and learned that she was a mentally and physically disabled woman who lived with relatives. They said she had no chance for a productive life. She was destined to live with her relatives until she died. Her name was Christina Barnett. That gave me what I needed to make things work. I had my birth certificate and I used it to get a driver's license and then a social security number and credit card. I even bought a decent used car using my new name. I cashed in a bunch of bonds that no one knew about and that I inherited after my mother died, so I had enough money to do whatever I needed to do. When I went to Charlie's, I became Christine Barnett. You talk about leaving so casually as if you were going to the grocery store and buying cereal. Your planning must have taken weeks or months. It wasn't some sudden decision. You planned and executed everything with exceptional precision. But you had no idea what you would leave behind, did you? I thought about it, but I knew it would be okay. Jason would be fine. He was a good father and took good care of the kids. Sure, he'll miss me for a while, but he'll move on with his life and looking at you. It seems like he did okay. Everything froze, and Maureen just sat there staring at him in amazement. Then her expression changed to one of curiosity. Her eyebrows furrowed, her mouth tightened, and her violet eyes stared at the woman. "I think I'm missing something." Maureen almost hissed as she spoke the words. "Who was Charlie?" "Oh, I guess I missed that part. Charlie was one of the family members of another estate I was working on. We became close while we were working on his aunt's papers. He lived in Texas, and when I left, I went to visit him. How close were you two?" "Well, let's just say we were good friends and leave it at that." "No, we're not going to leave it at that. Either you tell me everything about you and Charlie, or I'm going to come to this table and beat the truth out of you." Okay, don't threaten me. It was a long time ago, so it doesn't matter what you know. Charlie and I were lovers for a few months before I left. We saw each other a couple times a month, usually at the Holiday Inn in Ellicott City. We had a good time together, and he promised he would take me to see the world, climb mountains, and explore Fiji when I left Jason, and we were together. It was around this time that I found Christina's birth certificate. A couple months later, I had everything I needed and headed to Texas to be with him. The only problem was that he already had a wife and family, so I just kept going. I ended up going under Phoenix and, well, you cheated on Jason? I guess you could say that. I had already made the decision to leave him. It's just that Charlie sped things up a bit and gave me somewhere to go. It didn't quite work out the way I planned, but it was too late to go back. And you never looked back? I felt bad leaving my two kids with Jason, but I knew he could handle it. He was a strong man, and raising the kids would be easy. Sometimes I felt guilty about it all, but I just looked forward and tried to let the past get in the way. And then, well, I eventually married a man who owned a motorcycle store in Phoenix. We had a lot of fun traveling all over the Southwest, Mexico, and even Canada. He was killed behind the wheel in Texas when his Harley crashed into an armadillo that threw him into the oncoming lane. I sold the motorcycle store and moved to Sacramento. A few years later, I met and married a man who owned a small vineyard in Napa Valley. From him, I learned all about winemaking. We traveled extensively in Asia, the South Pacific, and Alaska as he promoted his wines. He developed a particularly severe type of cancer and took his own life when he became quite ill. We were together for 8 years. I sold the vineyard and moved to Seattle, where I met Tom. Tom was a trucker. I often went on delivery trips with him. We had a lot of fun until a welding cylinder exploded in front of his nose. The police thought I was some kind of black widow because my husbands had died tragically. It was just some kind of bureaucratic mix-up. But they found out about my real identity and about Jason. At first, I didn't want to meet him, but they insisted, and eventually I agreed. When I found out he was outside the door, I chickened out and said I didn't want to see him. I could hear him yelling behind the door as it closed. "I'm sorry. I did that to him. I don't understand why he said those things and went so crazy." Inside, Maureen was seething with rage. Outwardly, it only manifested itself by looking at him with steely eyes and gritting her teeth. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. A woman who had once been married to the man she loved more than anything in the world was talking about men and love as if it were food served for dinner. Take a spoonful, enjoy it while it lasts, and move on to the next course. Get what you want and move on. Maureen couldn't think straight. She was so angry. The only thing she could think of to say was this. So, I guess you never got to see Paris then? The question sounded rather sarcastic. Oh, I went to Paris with Gordon, or was it Gary? Either way, he was just a friend. I went to Fiji with Elroy and to Egypt with someone else whose name I can't remember now. I've been a lot of places and seen a lot of things, but not as much as I dreamed of when I was a kid. I want to see everything and do everything before I die. The place I liked the most was a little village in Italy near Florence called San Gimignano. I spent a month there with Pablo. That's where I'm going now. I have a plane from New York to Florence in 2 days. I'm going to try to find a small villa in Tuscany to live in. Beyond that, who knows? What a whore you were, weren't you? And how many men did you sleep with while you were married to Jason? I never even looked at other men besides Charlie until after I left. I was a good wife. Maureen's mind was still churning and she was still angry enough to squeeze a lump of coal into a diamond. If there had been a gun at hand, there would be a corpse sitting in the chair across the room right now. But there was no gun or any other weapon within reach. She was contemplating what to do and what to say when a light bulb came on above her head. "Excuse me. Let me get us something else to drink." Maureen took 2 cups and went into the kitchen. She was tempted to throw the cup Elise she was drinking from out the window, but it had been boarded up for the past few months and Jason had promised to fix it. Instead, she simply set the cups in the sink and pulled out a clean pair. Returning to the living room with fresh tea, she settled back on the couch and started talking. "You've been kind enough to tell me about your interesting life since leaving Baltimore, so I think it's quite appropriate to tell you about ours," Maureen said with a slight grin on her face. "Well, I'll start with the day you left. It was Wednesday, May 20th to be exact. The babysitter called Jason and got worried when you didn't pick up Jeremy and Bethany, so Jason went and got them. He waited for you to come home, but you never showed up. He called everyone he could remember, but no one had seen you all day. They found your car in the parking lot at work, and it seemed like you just disappeared. Your friends at work were looking for you. Jason drove around looking for you, and the police got involved when Jason got persistent in asking them about you. For the first few days, he was frantic. He kept imagining you lying in a ditch, unable to communicate. He imagined someone had kidnapped you, but either way, he was confused. The newspapers printed a story about you and hinted that Jason might have killed you and hidden the body. That's what the police thought for a while. His mother moved here to take care of the kids and help with whatever he needed, and what he needed was you. But there was no trace to tell where you were. Jason said you disappeared like a flake in the wind. Eventually, he went back to work. It helped bring some sense of normalcy back into his life. But he was never the same again. He went on weekend search expeditions, called everyone you two ever knew, contacted the police in every county in Maryland, and even put missing persons notices in the local papers. Nothing. Not a single lead. Christmas that year was especially hard on him. He had seen a therapist by then, but it didn't help much, and he was very depressed. So much so that he planned to take his own life. His mother found out before he did anything serious and talked him out of it. You should know that she never once said a bad word about you. Both she and Jason hoped that one day you would come home again. Everywhere he went, he thought he saw you. Then one day he just gave up. Everyone did everything they could to find you. But you weren't there. His life was empty. He felt like his life was over. He had to explain to Jeremy and Bethany that you were gone and you weren't coming back. They thought you were dead, but he told them that you were not in heaven. He doesn't know where you are. He asked them to pray that you would come home someday, but you didn't come back. On the anniversary of your disappearance, May 20th, a year later, your former boss, Barbara, found Jason in the parking lot where you worked, crying and talking to himself. He was out of it, and Barbara helped him into the building. She tried to talk to him and even gave him something to drink, but all he did was sit on the floor and sob. He kept saying, "Please don't leave me," over and over again. They couldn't get him to stop crying and finally called the paramedics. They took him to the hospital where he spent the next 3 months in a psychiatric ward. He had a goddamn nervous breakdown. Today it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Just a fancy name for loss of judgment. Same problem, different name. Whatever you call it, Jason went insane and lost his grip on reality, all because of you. All because you got up and disappeared like a flake in the wind. When you left him, you did it in the most devastating way possible. You couldn't have found a more rotten or despicable way. If you had been promiscuous all over town and laughing in his face, he would have been humiliated and devastated, but at least he would have had a good reason to let you go. It would have been a lot easier than just disappearing anyway. You had made a huge hole in his life and there was nothing to patch it up. He went insane for a while. The only people who supported him were his family and his boss at work. Everyone else thought he was crazy. It took him over a year to come to his senses. After that, he was under the care of a psychiatrist for several years, and all that time he had no idea what you had done or why. You couldn't have broken him more if you'd run him over with a bulldozer. 3 years after you disappeared, someone suggested he file for divorce and move on with his life. He couldn't do it. He always hoped that one day you would just show up at the door. He almost lost his mind at that moment. It wasn't until 7 years after you disappeared that he was able to make the decision to move on with his life. It was the hardest thing he ever did when he filed the paperwork to have you declared legally dead. In legal parlance, it's called an in absentia death. It almost killed himself, too, letting you go after all these years. All his siblings, his mother, his boss from work, and even his therapist were there for him when he had to stand in front of the judge and explain the reason why he wanted to declare you dead. It was a solemn day for everyone, and there were so many tears there were enough for a swimming pool. But he did it. He persevered and lived on. Jason and I met at a barbecue at a mutual friend's house. I had lost my husband in a car accident a couple years before, and Jason was wandering through life with no purpose after you died. They introduced us and left to see what would happen next. We talked for the rest of the day. After that, we started seeing each other as friends and sometimes went out with the kids. The kindest man in the world helped me realize the tragedy of my husband's death and gave me a reason to rejoice. After we got to know each other better, he said he wanted to marry me, but he said he would only do so if I listened to his whole story first. Until then, he had told me very little about you and his problems. We rented a small cabin in the woods by the lake, and he spent the next 2 days telling me all the details of his messed up life. He even told me about the psychiatric hospital and his counseling sessions. He spent most of the weekend crying and talking. I felt so sorry for him. I felt angry at you. I couldn't believe that someone could be so heartless and cruel, and do to him what he told me about. It was unbelievable. On the 3rd day, we just sat by the lake and held hands. We didn't say a word. I fell in love with him that day and have loved him more and more every day since. A year later, we got married. The next year, Rosa was born. We decided to name her Rose because she symbolized our love and rebirth. And although the rose has thorns, we knew that no matter what thorns we faced in life, we would meet them together. We would be together until one of us died. I have been living with your ghost since I met Jason, a ghost that has haunted us as a family since you disappeared, an evil ghost, the ghost of the unknown. I don't know what will happen today, but I pray to God that you will be banished from our lives once and for all. Just know this. I would never leave him the way you did. I love him more than you ever could. I'll be by his side forever. You almost killed the kindest, gentlest man I've ever met just by vanishing into thin air. Maureen leaned back in her chair and unclenched her fists. She was so angry she was shaking. But she'd said her word, and hopefully that cruel, heartless bitch sitting at the other end of the room would have some understanding of what she'd done. If she never realized anything, there was no hope for her. She was nothing more than a rabid dog that needed to be put to sleep. I didn't know. I couldn't have known that leaving him would cause so much pain. Of course you didn't know, you stupid, selfish bitch. You were only thinking about yourself and how much fun you were going to have, and all the men who would be in your bed. How could you be so damn selfish? Both women looked at each other in silence. Mom, we're home. Where are you? Came the call from the front door. You won't believe what Rose stopped seeing the brunette sitting across from her. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we had company. Where's your father? Asked Maureen. I'm here, Jason said, coming up behind his daughter. What's going on? Before he could finish the sentence, he saw Alicia at the other end of the room. Even though she had her head down, there was no mistaking that it was her. "Hi, Jason," she murmured, looking at him. He just stood motionless with his mouth open. "Rose, honey, why don't you call Olivia and ask if you can come over to her house for a while?" asked Maureen. "You can show her your new iPhone." At it, she escorted the girl out of the room and stood in front of Jason, looking him straight in the eye. She whispered softly, "Jason, look at me. You have to do this. You can do this. You're strong, and I know you'll do what you have to do. Just remember that I'll never leave you, but I'll be in the bedroom now. If you call for me, I'll come running, but I don't think you'll need me. For now, just sit down and talk to her, please." Jason focused on his wife, and a small tear appeared in one eye. She was right. He had to do this no matter how much it hurt. Everything would be okay as long as his wife, his love, was there for him. Removing the smile, she fixed a hard grin on her husband and turned to take one more look at the woman sitting in the chair at the other end of the room before going upstairs and closing the door. If looks could kill, the brunette would be dead where she sat. It was almost midnight when Maureen heard a car pull up to the house. She leaned back in her old chair and looked out the window. She saw Alicia walking down the path in front of the house and getting into a cab parked there. The car drove off and she sat back and relaxed, waiting for her husband to come up. An hour passed and she began to worry. She started to get up and go downstairs to find him when the door opened. Jason walked in, looking like a little boy whose puppy had just died. You could tell by his swollen red eyes that he had been crying. But now they were together, the two of them in their bedroom. He didn't say a word. He simply walked over and knelt down in front of his wife, wrapping his arms around her legs. He laid his head in her lap inside. She reached out and stroked his hair as he breathed quietly. For a long time they didn't move. Maureen broke the silence with a whisper. "Are you okay?" He raised his head and looked into her eyes. "Yeah, actually, I think I am. It didn't go at all the way I expected. But it's all over now. She's gone, and we never have to worry about her again. Right now, I feel like a 24-year-old weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I still have a lot to get over, but I think I'll be okay." She smiled a crooked smile, not knowing whether to be happy or sad. "Do you want to talk about it?" she whispered. "Yeah, a little bit. But tomorrow I want to visit my mom and tell you both all the details and at the same time. Right now, I'll just tell you the highlights. I don't know if you two talked before we came home, but she told me the reason she left. You're not going to believe this. Do you want to hear it now or tomorrow?" "What did she say?" "This. She said she'd had several affairs with men almost from the day we got married, maybe a dozen or more over the years, even when she was pregnant. She said I never satisfied her in bed and found that other men could ring her bell much better than I could. She met men at work, at bars, and even one at the grocery store. She said she'd had an endless stream of men in bed since leaving, and she'd even married some of her best lovers. She sounded like she was bragging. I had no idea. Now she appeared in a different light. I never would have thought she was such a whore. God, what a horrible man I married. I was so in love with what I thought she was and what I thought she should have been that I didn't even notice what a despicable slut she really was. Oh my God, did she really say all that?" "Yes, and she seemed very proud, almost arrogant. She didn't seem to repent of anything. She didn't shed a tear or apologize. Worst of all, she didn't ask about Jeremy or Bethany at all. What a heartless bitch. I regret spending even a second worrying about her when I should have been there for my family. I'm so sorry she came between us. Nothing like that will ever happen again. It's over, and now we can move on with our lives. I love you, Mr. Woods. Always have and always will. Take me to bed and hold me." They stood and hugged each other tightly as lovers do. Words were not needed. They communicated by touch. A man and a woman so much in love with each other, hearts beating in unison. Maureen thought of the lie Alicia had told, a lie that would allow the man embracing her to be whole again, to banish the ghosts and demons of his past once and for all. Everything will be okay from now on. A smile played on her lips as she hugged him back. Jason whispered, "Tomorrow on the way to my mom's, I want to talk about the second honeymoon I promised. We've earned it, so I'll take time off work, and we'll go in the spring. What do you think about that?" Sounds great, except I don't like Italy as much anymore. What do you think of Tahiti? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.